So this brings us to the interview portion of our meeting, and you are in for a treat. We have an absolutely wonderful guest this evening. I want to welcome Robyn Eason here. Hi, Robyn. I want to wave to everybody so we can see you. And thank you very much for coming and being part of our meeting tonight. Can we switch to just the two of us view, Michael? Do you know how to do that? Or no?
I know we can go to.
Who knows? If you don't have it on speaker view, try to switch it. Try to switch your Zoom call to speaker view for the interview portion of this. Unless you just prefer to keep it with the whole crowd and just have the little tiny windows, it's whatever makes it work for you guys. So anyway, Robyn, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate you being here. Robyn is in charge. Let's see, what's your official title? The Senior Advisor for Policy and Advocacy for the United States Green Building Council. That's the USGBC. The Los Angeles chapter. Those are the lead people that you see buildings get like LEED Platinum, LEED Gold, those kind of things. And Robyn heads up that for them and has been involved in just a number of things in terms of being an advocate for climate, for sustainability, and for really a bunch of stuff that needs to happen in our world. And we're really fortunate to be here, to have her here this evening. So welcome, Robyn.
Thank you, Charles. Hi, everyone. Good to see your faces and really inspiring to hear all of the great work all of the committees are doing. I'm not sure why I haven't been linked with this group prior to now, but I certainly already have signed up for the newsletter. So looking forward to being more plugged in henceforth.
I'm sorry, go ahead. We're kind of like the way too friendly neighbors. Once you make friends with us, you're not going to get rid of us. So you're definitely part of us now, and I appreciate you doing this. You know, the reason I asked you to come and be part of this series, Robyn, is because we've had some really great people so far, and I have had the pleasure of interacting with you a little bit through USGBC LA, and you know, Robyn is one of these people who is just despite difficult challenges and difficult odds, she always has a great attitude and makes everybody around her feel like the difficult is possible and makes everybody feel good about their advocacy. And that's something that's a lesson for all of us, and just really made a strong impression on me. And I wanted to bring that energy to you guys. So could we start off a little bit, Robyn, by maybe you telling us a little bit about your journey, your path to getting involved in sustainability issues, and how you kind of ended up where you are?
Yeah, thank you, Charles. So I'm 43, and that's an important number because my generation came about professionally at a time where environmental sustainability wasn't really a thing. It wasn't really talked about. You couldn't go to school for it. You know, I think it was just kind of an emergent idea. And so I actually started my career in economic development. I had a background educationally in urban planning, architecture, and civil engineering. I originally thought I was going to design roadway bridges as sculptures, and then quickly realized I liked more of the sort of contextual storytelling that urban planning had to offer in terms of just the interdependence of systems. So went the economic development route and started working in urban neighborhoods for about 4 years, learning the ropes of understanding why some neighborhoods are thriving while others might be struggling to attract, you know, job generators and affordable housing and things of that nature. So did that type of work for about 4 years and had the pleasure of doing that interdisciplinary with architects and engineers. And some of the architects had lead AP, lead accredited professional behind their names, and that was very intriguing. This is circa 2008. And I was in Washington, D.C. at the time, which is the headquarters of where the U.S. Green Building Council National resides. And so I think it was a little bit of where kind of luck meets opportunity. I was sort of really drawn to this new concept at the time called green building, and happened to put my hat in the ring for a few job opportunities at the headquarters in DC. And at the time, they were actually about to launch their green communities rating system known as Lead for Neighborhood Development, and needed someone with an urban planning background to help lead that program or co-lead that program. And so one thing led to another, ended up joining the USGBC National. And that was great for me because then it meant that I didn't have to go back to school for sustainability. I could just learn about what green building and green communities were as USGBC defined it on the job. And I could use my architecture and civil engineering background to kind of help with some of the building-wide suite of standards. So that was my foray into sustainability circa 2009. I was with USGBC for about 7 years, really at the time where LEED was exploding in all the various ways. The marketplace was really excited about what it meant for them to design environmentally responsible buildings and henceforth communities. And it was a really kind of rocking, great time. Found myself moving to California in 2014, mainly because I was just drawn to how progressive the state has been, sort of out of necessity, given all the smog and air pollution that was going on in the 80s and 90s, and was just really intrigued by being in an environment that had legislation that was pioneering in climate change in so many ways. And so eventually found myself applying for jobs in the public sector and ended up landing a position at the city of West Hollywood, California. They needed someone to lead up their sustainability activities and build a sustainability portfolio in various ways that I can get into. So ended up joining that city and doing some really great work for them in all lines of sustainability and equity and the intersection of justice and all of those things. I was there for about 6 years. It was a kind of fantastic learning environment and collegiate environment to do really good sustainability work, not unlike what y'all are doing here at Climate Reality. But after 6 years of that and being sort of the only person in that position leading those efforts, really just got burnt out and decided to take some time off from traditional employment last April. So I had some fun reconnecting with folks I hadn't seen since the pandemic, and now find myself up in the Central Coast, working remotely for USGBC LA and doing some other work in sustainable winemaking up here. So that's my brief story in a nutshell, but happy to go through any specifics as it makes sense.
That's awesome. And I'm going to ask you about the wine because that's fun, but we'll save that for a little bit later. One of the things that strikes me as valuable about where you are in your path is that you come from that urban planning perspective, which urban planning is all about thinking about systems. And I think that is so important to environmental work, so important to climate work, is that we don't just think about solving solar or solving energy with solar. We don't just think about solving pollution with eliminating plastic on the beach. There's so many other things. Everything's connected to one another. We have to think about product life. We have to think about how one little act here affects 4 or 5 other sectors, and biodiversity and species extinction is all connected to 100 different things that are happening. And I think it's really important for us to environmentalists to always come at things from a systems point of view whenever possible. And so having, your background in there, it's got to inform, a lot of what you do, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very astute way of putting it, Charles. I think I was fortunate to pivot from architecture and engineering into urban planning, because urban planning itself, regardless of sustainability, is a broad area of practice and expertise. And so I had to start thinking interdependently and even generationally. So I would say breadth and depth early on in school. And that really kind of prepared me then to eventually pivot into the sustainability profession, because everything goes together. And it actually, to me, it's what makes things certainly challenging, but also fun, right? You're thinking about EV charging and green affordable housing and solar and battery storage, and how all of these sort of larger systems goes into an actual building or transportation electrification, but then how that then narrows down and affects the actual person living in an apartment or in a home, and how that then translates into how they live their daily lives. And so it's great because it touches us all, whether or not you have expertise in this industry or not. There's something that all of us can do within it. And I think having those kind of messages branded, throughout society is what hopefully will allow us to begin to work more in line with nature versus the other way around in years to come.
So I'm struck by something else you said, where you talked about your kind of path and your experience with USGBC, when really they were just getting the ball rolling. I mean, I don't think a lot of people maybe have a perspective. They see like a building's a LEED platinum or something, or LEED gold or something, and they see a plaque on the side of the building, and it's easy to assume that these standards have been around for centuries or something, that this is something that's a long established thing. But having done some LEED training myself, it was surprising to me. This is a new frontier. This is really brand new stuff that's just been evolving in the last decade or so. And all of this work in trying to figure out how to take this built environment and decarbonize it and make it cleaner and make it sustainable for a long-term future is new thinking. And you're in at the ground level of building an entire new approach to the way buildings and humans interfacing with them happen. Can you talk a little bit about that, the challenges you face, and particularly building decarbonization? I know is a topic that a lot of our members are interested in, talking about the challenges and how we get to where we need to go.
Yeah, building decarbonization is certainly a complicated target, or just a topic in and of itself. I would say that you're right in that, the US Green Building Council actually just celebrated 30 years of existence. And when I was there, it was definitely still, let's say, in toddlerhood. And everybody was just really excited about what this could mean for the marketplace moving forward. And I think one of the things that USGBC did really well was distill the concepts of green building down into a few credit categories and then a few credits, and they use that nutritional card as the symbol for, like, this is the recipe for how you do green building according to the things that we've polled the marketplace is the important components of a green building. And so it was a digestible way to educate, industry experts, the public, what have you, and what were some of the major components of green building. And then it just kind of exploded from there. You have cities adopting LEED as part of their policies. In fact, Cal Green was largely based off of LEED. It's now in some ways its own thing for California, which is just great to see. And now 30 years later, you have this maturity in a lot of these different concepts. But if it wasn't for the US Green Building Council kind of setting the stage and doing it in such an elegant way, we wouldn't be as far along as we are now, that's for sure. And so, in thinking about that, I think it's important then to bring that back to building decarbonization. And I think that's going to be our gnarly challenge, biggest nut to crack, if you will, moving forward, is like, what are some of those levers of change that cities, that property owners, that contractors and vendors, policymakers, what have you, need to think about in order to make this happen? We need to think about the just transition, a workforce that can really be trained in electrification and renewable energies and the interconnection of these systems, smart building technologies, in order then to be able to even install some of these things. We're looking at it from a new construction perspective, and we're looking at it from an existing building perspective. We have to also think about equity, right? And the energy cost burdens that so many of low wealth communities and communities of color face just to pay their utilities and electric bills, right? So how is each community thinking through the application of building decarbonization policies within their cities in order to not overburden those that are already burdened with a number of life issues? And so it's moving in the right direction. We have a number of different jurisdictions that have adopted either building electrification codes, natural gas bans, a number of these different policies that think about new appliances and when those mandates need to be required, different energy efficiency methodologies, smart technologies, and even occupant education, which is something I don't think is talked about a lot as well. And I think it's just finding those sweet spots along the way of, as these buildings age, when do we pull the trigger for some of these things to come into effect? How do we align ourselves with marketplace efforts, from different federal agencies that are coming into play as well. And then how do we in some ways make a recipe for digestion for these concepts so that folks who are charged with doing the work are able to understand how to do the work.
Yeah, it's a complicated task, and thank you for really offering a nice perspective on that. It's not simply just a matter of just telling each developer, well, you just have to do electric now, kind of thing. There's so many different things. A building is one of the most complicated things that we create as a culture and as humanity. And just hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of parts that go into the construction of most new buildings. And the entire process from the construction to the design to the disposal, the end of life of all that stuff factors into everything we're talking about in terms of sustainability. One of the things that we as an advocacy group depend on is people like you who are kind of in the weeds on that, because the people in this group aren't going to get involved in negotiating ASHRAE standards or anything like that. I mean, that's just most of them don't even know what I'm talking about, kind of thing. So that's not going to be our lane. But one thing that is our lane is challenging false statements and people who challenge sustainability for whatever reason, a political agenda. And we're starting to now enter a phase where I'm noticing more and more a lot of the things that are being done in the building front in the name of sustainability are being challenged on a political front. And I'll give you an example. Something as simple as requiring electrification of appliances going forward, that we use electric stoves and ovens instead of natural gas-based ones. And same with our dryers that we use in our house. There is an element out there who opposes this, and for whatever motivations I won't necessarily characterize, but they tend to say that they're going to support legislation saying we have to keep using natural gas, and we're not going to get on board with this crazy communist, democratic, socialist, liberal conspiracy to put electric appliances in people's houses. Even though these really shouldn't be politicized issues, because they're about health, they're about supporting people. There's no good way that you can say you're better off with a gas appliance being installed in a new building than others. So as somebody who heads up advocacy and encounters these kind of hurdles, what would be your take on that, or your advice to a group of people who are involved in advocacy for dealing with things like this on the building front when we hear stuff like efforts in a number of states to actually challenge something along those appliance issues?
Yeah, this is a great question. Maya Angelou, I think she said something along the lines, it's not a direct quote from her, but people at the end of the day remember how you made them feel, regardless of how many interactions you might have had with them. It's sort of, what do they feel when they're around you? What do they feel with your expression of self and your expression of what it is that you do? And, that's not everybody, but I think at the core of most of society, we want to live in a place where, if we have the fortune to have a family, see that next generation thrive. We want to live in a place that's safe, that we have access to basic human rights, housing, energy, water, a number of those things. And a lot of this conversation, I think you're right, Charles, it elevates into sort of propaganda on, who's on what side. And it forgets the sort of humanistic approach to what we're all talking about, right? Climate is about human needs. It's also about non-human needs. But in terms of it relating to those of us who exist as part of this human species, it's about how we relate to each other at the end of the day. It's about making sure that our communities are taken care of. It's about making sure, your aunts or your daughters or your sons or your fathers or whomever that are okay at the end of the day. And so I think there's an element of having to storytell and personalize what we're doing in a way that really touches folks' hearts, right? I think everybody can relate to having someone in their family that might have suffered from something. And so really getting to the heart of like what that feels like to know of folks that might have either suffered or that you might just want the best for those that you care about. And so I think in the way that we approach advocacy at UHGBC LA, yes, we want to do the advocacy letters. Yes, we want to meet with state senators. Yes, we want to do all of the sort of traditional advocacy methods. Those are important. Talking to people who are in power is important. Also bringing the voices of the community to those in power is important. But at the end of the day, we also want to, I call it democratize advocacy and really personalize it in a way that we're all kind of living storytellers of the world we want to see in society. And so if there's a way that we can find connection as we continue to talk about all of these levers of change, whether it's in buildings or transportation or what have you, related to climate action, I think that's going to be the key that continues to move us forward. And those that don't want to listen, that's fine. But very similar to how USGBC started, you had the pioneers who are already on board. You had the marketplace that was trying to think of like, okay, what is this new green building idea? And then you had what they called the laggards who just, stood in their footsteps and dug their heels into the ground and didn't want to move. But what happened 30 years later, green building is now normalized. And so we got to get to a point where all of this is just normalized. And it takes folks like the folks that are here now in order to do that and do that in community.
Yeah, that's really good advice. You never cease to surprise me with how insightful you seem when I ask you a question like that. So thank you on that. I want to point out that that the Maya Angelou quote was put in the chat by one of our members. So if you want to see the full quote, take a look at it in the chat.
Thank you for that.
So to that end, I want to ask you a question that may be not fair to ask you, but I know you have been involved in efforts to support BIPOC initiatives within representation within sustainability circles and efforts to support climate justice and things along those lines. I think that that's something our organization it does have a national level that has funding, but the local chapters basically kind of are on our own. We're just a bunch of people without dues, without a real, without like a huge budget or anything like that. And so we're just kind of a small group of people trying to fight the good fight at a local level. That being said, where I think one of the areas where I think we have not been very successful is being extremely representative of Los Angeles as a whole. And you can see that in this room. Most of us who are here tonight are kind of like me, kind of grayish, a little bit of gray, or maybe a little more gray white people. And that's not to say that grayish hair white people are not important and welcome to the cause, and you're all welcome here. And I want you to be here. Let me re-emphasize that. You are important, but it would be nice if we have more people who look like you or look like different from us as part of that conversation. And I don't think we've always been successful in doing that. We have over 1,500 members in our chapter, and we're much more represented in that large 1,500 because those are people who are oftentimes have attended the chapter trainings and things, and National does make an effort to be more proactive in those areas. But I'm curious if you have as somebody who is just kind of new to our group, if you have a perspective on things that maybe we could be doing better to engage with groups that are not as well represented within our numbers.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think, I guess one thought I have is, given the sort of vast number of your membership, 1,500 members is a heck of a critical mass. And I can only imagine that they're scattered throughout the LA region. And so one thought I would have is, I think make it known that, we really want to be as inclusive of different groups to, serve on the committees, to think of either new committees that may not exist, but that maybe need to exist in order to have that that adequate representation, and then go out and talk with folks from the areas that may make sense to have that kind of either racial diversity or diversity of some other type. There's so many community-based organizations in Los Angeles. I was just reading through the website of the Liberty Hill Foundation and the great work that they are doing related to youth environmental justice and a number of different like commission trainings and making sure that there's representation on some of these different governing bodies. And, aligning with foundations like that have those types of missions, aligning with some of the existing community-based organizations, just understanding where they might be coming from with some of their needs. It may be environmental justice, but they might be using different words to describe the things that they're doing. And so really just, I call it, one of the things I've always done when I've moved to a new area is I crudely, in my olden days, called it blitz the market. But what I really meant was do the sort of due diligence of understanding, who's in your market, who's in your neighborhoods, who are your neighbors, who are the people that that you don't know that are doing great work. What are some of the issues that they're facing? Who are the Angelinos that know this place inside and out, that have been dealing with injustices for since they their existence here, and those are the folks that I want to understand their stories, and then how it makes sense, if it makes sense, to align with either those individuals, those community leader groups, or those community-based organizations. And I think the important thing to say here is that it's not like a light switch. It'll take time and it might take years, but that's okay, because that's how genuine relationships are formed. That's how understanding is created. And then that's how power is built. And once you have that kind of critical mass of power and critical mass of people who trust each other to do the work and to be accomplices to the folks that need it. And that's how you kind of shift the mindset and shift the focus and see the results that you want.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you very much. My next question is really one of an invitation as well as a question. And that would be, since we do have ourselves involved in advocacy and you're involved in advocacy, are there things that our organization can do that can help USGBC-LA and their advocacy? I mean, I know the legislative list of bills that you saw that Andrew was talking about a little earlier, that we work with San Fernando Valley on, and that corresponds quite favorably with the list that USGBC-LA was lobbying on behalf of this year. They're not completely the same by any means, but there's a lot of favorable overlap. And so as we look maybe toward next year's effort or the year after that to do that, is there a way that we can help your efforts and by association have you help our efforts in terms of that advocacy and be allies to one another more effectively maybe than we've been able to be previously?
Absolutely. Yeah. And just preparation for being here and looking at your website, I was again blown away by the number of different topical committees that exist under climate reality, and was thinking through all of the committees that exist under USGBC-LA, and I was like, wow, there's great synergy already that exists between the two groups. And I think it could be really powerful to maybe sit down with you, Charles, or some of the committee chairs of both organizations and see where it makes sense to come together on a variety of issues. I know for our advocacy efforts, I've just been in this position helping out USGBC-LA for about 6 months. And so this has been kind of an experimental year to sort of help us mature in how we want to, what is our advocacy identity? And I think we've made some strides in that related to the bills that we've chosen, but also just making headway with state representatives that we want to be resources for. But I think, like I was saying before, with the critical mass, there's always power in numbers, and we do see the value in coalition building. And so I think that there is a great room for collaboration and putting our heads together and seeing what makes sense to have joint efforts, both in advocacy, but I would say also in events, maybe even, getting in front of like local cities and jurisdictions in the Southland as well, related to some of the topic areas that we want to see represented within our local space here. So that was a long way to basically say yes.
Well, no, I appreciate that. And I'm sure you and I can follow up, but let's make some of that stuff happen if we can. So that's good. All right, before I open it up to the general group for questions, I want to ask you about the wine stuff. What makes wine sustainable? Why should we care about it? And tell me something fun about being involved in that whole process.
Yeah. So I guess I'm going to personalize it a little bit, but as you all know, I've worked a lot in urban areas. And so when I was taking some time off, what I realized was that I really had very little knowledge about what were some of the sustainability or climate conversations happening on working lands or agricultural spaces or what have you. And didn't necessarily think of wine in the beginning, but eventually came around to that. And, the proximity of the Santa Ynez, kind of north of Santa Barbara area, winemakers made it kind of really easy to just do some informational interviews and figure out what some of the things that they were discovering or just knew about that they were dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And so from those interactions, I realized that the wine industry has a ton of green certifications, some of them very akin to LEED for green buildings. It's not called LEED, but there's certifications that essentially wineries can pursue in order to be more water efficient, more energy efficient, use of renewable energies, EV charging infrastructure, et cetera. And then there's certifications that vineyards can pursue related to their farming practices. I think your food chair was talking a lot about regenerative agriculture, and that's a big discussion right now in the wine industry related to how they care for the vines, how they nurture them, and how they farm in a way that really supports organic soil health, holistic land management, largely using grazing animals, and figuring out ways that you can design biodiversity versus using pesticides to be able to keep the incidence of injury to the vines at minimum. And so it's been really fascinating to discover the chatter that's been going on. One last thing I'll say about it is that industry has also been thinking a lot about scope 3 emissions, which we don't think about a lot, consumption-based emissions. And so looking really at like shipping costs and using lightweight glass, and even in the tasting rooms, instead of having solo bottles that they pour for the customers, they now store, some of the wineries now store some of that wine in kegs. And so it still limits the oxygen that can get into wine, so it doesn't spoil, but it limits then the use of glass and other things that contribute to their carbon footprint. So it's been a really fantastic discovery to understand how another sort of industry is trying to do right by the planet. And yeah, there's just a lot to get into in this space as well.
Okay, so I'm putting you on the spot now. What is an example of a wine that checks a lot of those boxes, and that is your favorite wine that you would recommend to everybody in the room?
Ooh, favorite wine is hard, but I would say if you're really interested in this stuff, a winery that's doing really great things around this space is Tablas Creek Winery up in Paso Robles. They have a fantastic vineyard. They've gotten regenerative organic certification, and they're just doing a lot of really interesting, awesome stuff. They actually have a blog that they put out every week that's been fascinating to just follow, and it talks a lot about the things that I've just mentioned, but that would be a winery that I would lift up as doing some really great best practices in this space.
And their best wine for your money?
Ooh, gosh, they have a couple of Italian wines that they produce. And so I would say the Italian varietals, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but any of their Italian varietals would be my suggestion.
Okay, cool. And you handled that quite well. I didn't prepare you for that in our prep interview, so nice job. All right, we're going to open it up to people in the audience. You can raise your hand electronically or just raise it on the screen. We'll see you, and that'll work, and then I'll call you out, and you can ask Robyn your questions. Anybody have any questions for Robyn? Deborah, I saw you kind of raise your hand. Do you have a question? Oh, now you've gotten shy on me. All right, okay. We'll go with Andrew. Andrew, why don't you tell us what?
Hi, Robyn. I just had a couple of quick questions. USGBC is real focused on the Inflation Reduction Act. We all went through a training at Climate Reality to try to find out how to talk to our audiences about the Inflation Reduction Act. What's your best advice for getting the funds that are being dispersed by the federal government to communities that were impacted by fossil fuel development or transitioning, and also those communities who've been marginalized and historically not didn't have access to the financing available? So any comments on the IRA and its impact here? We're doing quite a bit of education on this, and we'd love to know what the USGBC is doing.
Yeah, so a lot of that work is being done by the USGBC National Advocacy Team. And Andrew, if you haven't seen it already, I can either maybe send through Charles a couple of links where they've actually elegantly distilled into a number of different one-pagers by property type, how to interpret the IRA, which I think is super helpful for anybody trying to understand, I'm going to call it the gobbledygook related to that legislation. Obviously it's an historic passage of a much needed bill. I think maybe I'll just speak for myself and would like to say that I wish a lot of it exists as sort of tax credits, right? And there's some kind of one-off programs that go beyond that. But I think sometimes when you kind of you hide policy around tax credits, it tends to get a bit lost, or it can make folks not as eligible for something just based on how it's constructed. And that's not a criticism of the IRA. It's just one of the challenges of when you structure policy like that. And so, I would love to see either from the Fed or maybe more realistically from the state that trickles down to local government and vice versa, more money that really goes towards actual programs that property owners can wrap their head around, that cities can wrap their head around, so that the folks that are closer to the people actually doing the work can facilitate taking advantage of those programs, or at least being able to utilize them in a way that then translates into actual projects on the ground. And so I know the state has some great resources and grants that they've put together in that regard. I'm hoping to see more of that. But yeah, happy to share those one-pagers with you if you think they'll be helpful.
Thank you so much.
Lucy, you're up.
So, Robyn, there was a wonderful, a few years back, must be 10 years back now, I was teaching in Van Nuys High School, and there was a wonderful, I think it was LA Green Building Council had a van, a little a demonstration van that they would take to schools. And I was wondering if that still exists, and do you know anything about it? And the other thing that I'm interested in is, are there principles that we should be teaching our students about green building and about how to make where you're living, your neighborhood, what are some principles that we might, or when might I find them, so that we can incorporate that in what kids are learning about climate?
Yeah, great question, Lucy. So I don't think the van exists anymore. At least it predates me. But we do have a sustainability curricula that was designed for K through 12 schools. I can try to find the link before we get off today. And we actually just brought on, she's been with us for probably about 2 months now, an educational director who's revamping some of the materials associated with some of the programs for those schools to make sure that they are a bit more sustainable. But yeah, there's a K through 12 curricula that we've been stewarding for quite some time, several years now, and we actually have, I think, a waiting list from schools that want to participate and have us come and demonstrate some of those kits with the kids. And so I think it could be a really great rubric for something that you're looking to do, or it could be, to Charles's point, a great way for us to partner, right, between the two organizations. So.
Hey, Michael, you're up.
Hi, Robyn. Good to see you. I was curious, we're from all over Los Angeles, and since you worked in West Hollywood for such a long time, I think it's interesting to see what we can learn from each other, and so was there anything that you guys worked on in West Hollywood while you were there that you think other cities should be doing or could learn from?
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, gosh, and there was so many things on the docket when I arrived at West Hollywood. One of the things we did was, we already had a green building ordinance, a local one on the books from back in the day, and we kind of revamped that program quite a bit. So the existing program, not to make this too long, was pre-Cal Green. And so it was very unique to West Hollywood, which made sense for 2007. But in 2017, when we were updating it, the state building code had been out then for like 7 years. And so one of the things we did with that local code was actually restructure it to complement the state code, because what was happening was that folks that wanted to build in West Hollywood, they had to look at the state code for a set of requirements. Then they had to look at West Hollywood for another set of requirements. And it was just really clunky in terms of folks being able to know how to proceed. And so what we were really keen on was, what is the state has already provided as a minimum green code for us? And then where were the areas where we could go beyond the state? And so EV charging was one area. We did sort of a kind of like a reach code for requiring rooftop, either solar or green roofs or what have you, and a few other things we wanted to see that go beyond the state. And so we ended up having a program that kind of stacked on what the state did, which meant that when folks came in for their planning docs to be approved at like the permitting stage, we had all of the requirements for the state and for West Hollywood on like one implementation kind of planning document sheet, and then that would translate into one sort of massive construction doc with all the requirements, both the state and West Hollywood requirements on one sheet. And then for the inspection part, we carved out what the state needed to see done and then what we needed to see done. And so worked a lot with building and safety to figure out how to elegantly do that. But what we wanted was people to have kind of a one-stop shop for each part of the process to build in West Hollywood, but then still build beyond the state code to the requirements that made sense for the property types within our city. And so that is a best practice that I don't see a lot. I think maybe Palo Alto is the only other city that I know of that has done something similar to that. But we were really trying to think through origin to completed building, and what was sort of the journey of the folks that had to do the work, and how do we do that in a way that really streamlined it so that at the end of the day, they do right by us and we do right by them.
All right, I'm going to wrap that up because I try to keep the trains moving on time here. But Robyn, dude, you rocked it. Very great work. Thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate your time, your insight. Having you as in our network as somebody that we can talk to is just very, very valuable to us. And a heartfelt thanks for you being here, but also for the work you're doing. I mean, because it's important and we greatly appreciate it. So thank you very much.